Okay, so picture this. It's 1990. Lights are blinding, crowds going absolutely nuts. And this guy in a monocle, decked out in full-on jodhpurs, vaults over the ropes into the ring.
That's an entrance.
This isn't just any entrance.
Yeah.
This is Chris Eubank announcing his arrival. You might know him for that. But trust me, the man behind the spectacle is even more intriguing. We're diving into the life and times of Chris Eubank, a man who transcended boxing to become a cultural icon. We've got a stack of sources here.
We do.
His autobiography, articles, fight footage. We're going to unpack it all. From his unconventional upbringing to his controversial reign as champion and beyond.
Oh, okay.
So where does this whirlwind story begin? Well, our journey starts in 1966, London, where Chris is born. But here's the twist.
Okay.
At just 2 months old, he's whisked off to Jamaica.
That's right. And he spends his formative years until the age of 6, immersed in Jamaican culture. Think about that for a second. That kind of early cultural shift, those vivid early memories, they inevitably shape your worldview. It's no wonder Eubank always stood out from the crowd.
Exactly. But then he's back in England, and let's just say, those early years weren't exactly a walk in the park. Multiple school expulsions.
Yeah.
A tough neighborhood in the South Bronx, it sounds like. Young Chris had a rebellious streak a mile wide.
It's easy to slap on labels, like troublesome.
Right.
But we need to consider the context. Imagine those early experiences, poverty, feeling like an outsider, maybe even struggling to connect with his brothers, all of which he alluded to later in life. It's plausible that this constant battle, that grit, became the foundation for his relentless drive in the ring.
And that's where things get interesting. It's in the heart of the South Bronx that Eubank discovers boxing.
Not just discovers, dives in head first. He follows his brothers to the Jerome Boxing Club, and it's at the switch flips.
Yeah.
She finds his element, his outlet, maybe even a sense of belonging he was craving.
And the man is a natural. He throws himself into training, wins amateur tournaments left and right. This wasn't just a hobby. This was his escape, his ticket to a different life.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, boxing in the 80s, especially coming from where he did, it wasn't just about winning, it was about survival, about proving yourself. It's in his autobiography. He talks about that hunger for acceptance, that need to silence the doubters, and boy, did he ever...
Oh. He proved them wrong, all right. Those early professional fights, they were like watching a one-man demolition crew. Knockout after knockout. But it was the Anthony Logan fight in '89. That's when people started really paying attention. Remember, Logan had almost taken down Nigel Benn, the rising star, the guy everyone was talking about.
And here's where Eubank's almost audacious self-belief kicks in. He saw Logan as his ladder, his stepping stone to Ben. He strategically sets up camp in Brighton, and boom, he's calling out Ben at every turn, every interview.
Talk about confidence. But it wasn't just talk, right? He backs it up in the ring, big time. Wins the WBC international title against Hugo Corti in 1990. Remember, that's the World Boxing Council, one of the big leagues.
Then me.
He delivers that jaw-dropping knockout against Reginaldo dos Santos. 20 seconds. 20 seconds. And it's over.
Those victories were more than just wins. They were statements. He was announcing his rival, not just as a contender, but as a force to be reckoned with. And he did it with this undeniable blend of charisma and raw power. It was captivating.
Setting the stage for the showdown everyone was waiting for. Eubank versus Ben, 1990, for the WBO middleweight title.
Ah, the fight that gripped a nation. Imagine this. It's 1990. The atmosphere is electric. Ben's the clear favorite, the tough kid from Ilford. But Eubank, he thrives on proving people wrong.
He's behind on points for much of the fight. Then, bam, 9th round, a brutal combination. I still remember watching it. My jaw was on the floor.
It was like a lion bringing down its prey. And in that moment, Eubank became a star. He didn't just beat Ben, he dethroned him. And he did it with a flair and ferocity no one could ignore. That Ben fight, it was a launch pad, a springboard, into a whole new level of fame. He defends the title against Dan Sherry, Gary Stretch, then a grueling match against Michael Watson. A fight that would foreshadow a darker chapter to come.
Right, because then comes that rematch with Watson in '91. And yeah, this one's tough to revisit, even all these years later.
It's a fight etched in boxing history.
Yeah.
But for all the wrong reasons. It's a stark reminder of the fine line between triumph and tragedy that defines this sport.
Eubanks behind on points gets knocked down himself, a rare sight, showing he was human after all. But then he claws his way back round by round. And then that 12th round, that uppercut.
A split second. That changed both their lives forever. Watson suffers a near-fatal brain injury, and the delayed medical attention only compounds the tragedy, the public outcry, the investigations. It cast a long shadow over Eubank's career.
You can see it in the footage from that night. The swagger's gone, replaced with this raw anguish, a profound sense of regret.
He grappled with the weight of what happened, even publicly contemplated quitting the sport altogether. He carried that burden, and it's reflected in his fighting style after Watson. The knockouts became less frequent, replaced by a more measured, almost hesitant approach. He talks about losing his finishing instinct in his autobiography. It's heartbreaking, really.
And it's around this time that his public persona, that love him or hate him image, really takes center stage. The monocle, the jodhpurs, that whole upper-class accent he adopted, it was like he was constructing this elaborate character, almost a caricature of himself.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Was it a defense mechanism? A way to distance himself from the brutality he now associated with the sport? Or maybe it was a way to regain control? To craft a narrative on his own terms, after all. In boxing. Like any sport. Image is everything.
Let's be honest. People ate it up. He's winning Best Dressed awards. While simultaneously being called arrogant, out of touch, he became a walking, talking paradox.
Which, of course, he played up brilliantly. Remember that interview where he called boxing a mug's game while wearing a custom-made suit? Pure genius. He knew exactly what he was doing, stirring the pot, keeping everyone guessing.
But here's the thing. Behind the headlines, behind the bravado, there's another side to Eubank. A side that often got overlooked. He was quietly building flats for the homeless, donating to charities.
Exactly. This is what makes Eubank so compelling. The contradictions, the layers. He defies easy categorization. Was he a villain, a hero, or, as is often the case, a complex mix of both?
Meanwhile, the boxing world keeps spinning. Ben's moved up to super middleweight, becomes WBC champ. The rematch is inevitable in 1993 Judgment Day. Talk about hype.
Another epic clash. A fight that solidified their place in boxing legend. No clean victory this time. It ends in a draw. But in a way, the ambiguity, the lack of resolution, only added to their mythology.
And Eubank's career continues, more wins than a loss to Steve Collins that cost him the title. He even tries his hand at cruiserweight. Talk about fearless.
You don't forget that late career fight against a young Joe Calzaghe. Eubank loses, but he goes the distance with a rising star. It's almost symbolic, a passing of the torch to a new generation.
And as his boxing career winds down, you'd think he'd fade into the background. Right, not a chance. Eubank was born for the spotlight, and he wasn't letting go that easily.
Oh, this is where things get really interesting. He's everywhere. Commercials for everything, from coffee to cars, reality shows, even a stint on Celebrity Big Brother.
Yeah.
He understood the power of media, the allure of personality.
And let's not forget that iconic Louis Theroux documentary, Pure Gold. And then there's that whole youth hosteling with Chris Eubank meme, proof that even decades later, he still holds a place in our collective consciousness.
It's like he predicted the age of viral fame. But here's the thing. He didn't just coast on his celebrity. He used those platforms to talk about issues he cared about. His anti-war stance, his philanthropy. He was determined to be more than just a punchline.
And he put his money where his mouth was. Literally. Remember when he got arrested for driving his truck plastered with anti-war messages around Parliament? He was a walking protest.
That's Eubank in a nutshell. Unconventional, unpredictable, and utterly fearless when it came to standing up for his beliefs. Even if it meant risking his reputation or facing legal trouble, that takes guts.
He never shied away from a fight in the ring or on the streets, but life outside the ropes. Well, that's where things get really complicated. We're talking about the man, the father, the husband. Those are roles that don't always get the same spotlight.
And they're often far messier than the carefully constructed narratives we see in the media. Eubank's personal life, much like his public persona, was marked by both joy and turmoil. You can't talk about Chris Eubank without talking about family.
Right. 4 kids with his first wife, Karen. And one of those kids, Sebastian, he follows in his dad's footsteps, right into the boxing ring.
Which, knowing Eubank's history with the Watson fight, must have been incredibly difficult for him to watch his own son step into that same space, knowing the risks, the potential for both glory and devastation.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? That shadow looming over them and the tragedy of Sebastian's untimely death in 2021, just a few days before his 30th birthday. It makes you question the weight of legacy, the ripple effects of the choices we make.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to that question of what we choose to remember. What ultimately defines a person's impact on the world? Is it the triumphs, the knockouts, the larger-than-life personality?
Or is it the quiet moments, the struggles, the contradictions that make us human? We've talked about the controversies, the very public divorce, the financial ups and downs. Life threw some heavy punches at Chris Eubank, both inside and outside the ring.
And that's what makes his story so captivating, so relatable. He was flawed, he was messy, he was brilliant, he was infuriating, he was, in many ways, a reflection of all of us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, this whirlwind tour of Chris Eubank's life, what's the takeaway? What do you think he'll be remembered for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The eccentric showman, the boxing legend, the devoted father, the activist, the complex and often contradictory figure who refused to be put in a box.
Maybe it's all of those things woven together. Maybe the true measure of a life isn't the singular narrative, but the messy, complicated tapestry of it all.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, Chris Eubank wouldn't have it any other way.
From his unconventional upbringing to his controversial reign as champion and, well, everything in between, it's been a wild ride through the life of Chris Eubank.
He certainly left his mark, didn't he?
That he did. That he did. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
Pleasure as always.
Until next time.